Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm happy to see our little group assembled today to talk about funding in schools. We are going to be touching a little bit on, or a lot on ESSER funding, this federal funding that's coming to US schools. But we think some of the discussion and the lessons learned and the things that we're going to talk about are applicable to all schools, and in general, being thoughtful about how we're spending for innovation. So if you're not based in the US, you may find this still valuable. If you are based in the US, I think you're going to find this information to be really essential, because there's a lot of money coming to schools and we want to see it spent wisely and with impact. So let's go ahead, Julene.
All right, so hi everybody, I'm Julian Reed. I'm in Memphis. I'm glad to be with you today. And then I'm going to go and start the recording for Lucy. The recording's going, start the slides so Lucy can keep going through the introductions.
So if you're not familiar with Actionable Innovations, we are a group, and first and foremost, we are a new professional learning community for people who are interested in pushing the envelope forward in education regarding innovation. And most of us have pretty deep experience in various aspects of education, from the design of learning environments to design thinking to global education to STEM and STEAM. And we're going to be meeting on a regular basis. Starting next Friday, we're going to have a few more sessions and really kind of trying to build a community for discussing and our own professional development in terms of what we need to know about teaching and learning in the modern age. So we invite you to join us at these actionable innovation conversations, but there's other things that are coming up as well that you will can partake in. So you can follow us on social media, and then we have, you can find everything under Linktree/actionable, and you'll see a screen like this and can follow us. Right now, we don't have the poll set up in Zoom, but if in the chat, we'd like you to do a couple things while we get started. One is please introduce yourself, tell us who you are, your role, and where you are. And at the same time, if you're in a district, please let us know if your school is receiving ESSER funds, and if you're and if anybody in your community has talked about this with you, because one of my understandings about this is that community input is supposed to be solicited for ESSER funding. So if you can let us know in the chat, we'd love to meet you. Put your information in there and keep the conversation going in the chat. We have resources available for you today that are going to be helpful, so you may want to open these in a separate window. We have a Google document that explains what this funding is and some various things that have been put together to support schools in using this funding. And there's going to be a Padlet in there that we're going to use and a spreadsheet later on. So please make sure that you have that those resources open in a separate window, and perhaps I'll put it in the chat as soon as I turn this over to Julene. Next slide. So this is what we're talking about today. We're joined by Julene and Curt, who is here from Sun Prairie area schools in Wisconsin. Welcome, Curt. We're glad to have you here. We'll give you some time to talk about what's going on in Sun Prairie with this funding in a little bit. But I want to go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about why I thought this topic was really important. So I read an article in the New York Times a month or two ago, talking about federal funding, stimulus money that was coming to schools, and that this third bucket was soon to be available to schools to help them cope with the pandemic. And so when you search for this, the first thing that comes up are a bunch of ads from organizations that are, can you go back for a second, Julian?
Yeah, hold on, sorry.
Computer okay.
Jumped it. Yeah, I just jumped it, sorry.
It's okay. So the first thing that comes up when you do a Google search is all these ads. You can see the word ad on the left-hand side, the top of a Google search, that are from organizations who are looking to connect with schools who are looking to spend their money, their ESSER money. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And if you weren't necessarily paying attention to your Google search, you may land on an ad that's really, geared towards getting your money, which is maybe not a bad thing necessarily. But I didn't necessarily find a lot of great resources for explaining how, what this funding could do or should do. And we did find a few resources in there in the doc that we're going to give to you later, that we gave to you a little while ago. Next slide. I also looked on Twitter to see if people were talking about this, and there was very little discussion about it. But again, there were companies and nonprofits who were gearing their tweets towards people using the hashtag ESSER. And so this gives you an example of, these are some examples of how some companies are thinking, and nonprofits too, of how they can support schools with their products and ESSER. So other than that, I have not seen a lot of conversation about this. And I think it's really important that we kind of dig into this. And for our group, we are having these conversations to benefit everyone, but we're also looking for consulting work down the road. And so I'm thinking if we, as the people who are involved with our consulting arm, want to get started with things, maybe we should be looking to what schools are and states are planning in terms of using this funding. Next slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Julene now, who will introduce herself and give you an idea of where we're going. And I hope that you'll add your comments and ideas in the chat, and we'll have some opportunity for further discussion as we get going. So thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you, Julian and Curt, for being here, and let's get going.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad you're here. I'm Dr. Julian Reed. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, and super excited to talk about this. And when we talk about funding and federal funding in the United States, it's not always with a smile because there are lots of nuances that go with it. But just thinking even bigger than ESSER funding, and especially for our global partners who are here thinking about what funding do you have, what innovations are you planning, and looking at what we're talking about today and how you can implement and apply these to your situation. So kind of our provocation is, how should we in general, as schools or districts or school organizations, prioritize funding for innovation? And I know innovation has lots of different nuances and ideas. I know what I think of when I think of innovation is probably very different than what Don Buckley thinks of. And yet we all know that it's something that doesn't exist today. That's something we're planning for the future. So we're going to talk more about that. I have been in K-12 for over 25 years. I'm a graduate professor at Lamar University. I also am a professor at Arizona State University and the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, and super excited to be in that. So I've taught from the young ones up through higher ed, and I've been an administrator and made these decisions and worked globally in lots of different places. And this is a really important topic, especially coming on the heels of the pandemic. And now that we're all resetting, and I'm working with districts and institutions all over and looking how they're prioritizing things, a lot of us are still on the Maslow's hierarchy scale. We're down at the bottom and trying to work our way up. And so we need to flip that triangle or flip that scale in some ways and be also thinking about innovation. So what is ESSER? For some of you who may not be in the US, this is ESSER, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund from the Office of Secondary and Elementary and Secondary Education here in the US. For some of you, you're like, oh my gosh, he's really telling us what this is. I've been living in this for how long now? And that's why Curt's here. Curt's going to be awesome. He'll introduce himself and he's going to share with you what they've been doing at his school district. And so it's really going to be a conversation. So being my little professorial self, I'm going to share some things with you, but anytime I would love to make it a conversation. And we're planning for that. So hopefully you'll have things to say. Feel free to jump in at any time. We're a small enough group. Just jump in and interrupt and add to anything that I'm saying. I would love that. So moving forward, whoops, one too many. What is the federal stimulus funding? And so here are all the different words you see in here and the acronyms if you're not used to them. But I want you to look at the bottom for these different ARP, the American Rescue Plan. the CARES Act and the CRRSA responding to coronavirus. Look at the amount of money that's out there. Lots of money, billions of dollars, and it's being allocated in lots of different ways. And I'm not going to put a bunch of slides about that on here, but I just want you to see it's a huge bucket of money. That's a one-time kind of situation that we have to take advantage of here in the United States. And I'm sure in other countries they're supporting you as well. So thinking about, how are you going to use funding that you do have? How are you going to meet the timelines? And so here are the timelines of when you have to enact and obligate and liquidate and all those different things for the different types of funding here in the US. So you can see it's a longitudinal timeline. It started back in 2020 and it's going clear through 2025. So it's not a one-shot deal. So depending on what program you're in and where your funds are coming from, you have different deadlines to meet. And I'm just thankful it's not my job, and bless those whose job it is, because it's very detail oriented as you're working through that. But there's $123 billion for, the regional school education agencies, the state educational agencies, and then the local education agencies. That's what SEA and LEA are. 800 million has been designated for homeless education, and 3 billion is for IDEA, which is for disabilities, so students with disabilities. So there's some designated funds that are very specific and some are much more general. And the formula for the funding for ESSER and these different programs in the United States really depends a lot on Title I. What it's telling you pretty much is the larger pool of low socioeconomic students that you have in your school or district, the bigger amount your funding will be. So if you have a large, low socioeconomic status group of students, you'll have a much bigger bucket of funding. And that's how they've set it up. And I was listening to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers again the other day, and it was interesting to hear him talk about, because I love his voice on podcasts and things. And he was talking just in general about low socioeconomic kids over the summer have a bigger loss in their learning scores when they come back to school. And a lot of that is just they don't have a stimulus at home. So their home environment, they're not, encouraging them to read, they're not taking them different places, to museums and different places like that, extracurricular activities or camps. So a lot of that is happening more to that population. Therefore, that's why we have more of that funding, I think, that is coming through and being channeled to that group, because they're the ones that seem to have the biggest decline in scores and different grades and assessments. So when you look at the funding, these are the ways it can be used. There are lots of ways. Note that it's very flexible. Within different buckets, there's a lot of flexibility. But here are the priorities. Ensure the health and safety of students, educators, and staff. That's no surprise after COVID-19. That's priority. That's number one up at the top. And as we continue with variants, that continues to be a conversation. Address learning loss. You see learning loss used a lot. That's a word I struggle with, because look what our kids did learn. They learned life skills, resiliency, the importance of family, how to problem solve, how to be independent and manage your own time, how to use the digital technologies and virtual environments. So that loss isn't really a loss in the big picture. But districts and schools, you'll see, are talking a lot about learning loss. And I think we ought really rephrase that and reframe it in a different way, because I think it has a very negative connotation. And yes, we have some scores and some students who aren't where they were 2 years ago at this point in time in the year, but they'll get there. So with our support, they'll get there. Social emotional well-being, that is huge. And that's probably on every state's list of priorities, is social emotional well-being. Education equity. And if you ask everyone on this call what equity means to them, in fact, in the chat, put in just a couple words of what you think of when you think of equity. What do you think of when you think of equity? When you hear that word, what's the first thing? No, just think, first word that comes to mind. Same opportunities. Oh, I love that, Greg, talking about learning acceleration, not learning loss. Love that. Things that are both fair and equal. Opportunity, good. And different people think of different things. So there's digital equity, there's racial equity, there's global equity. lots of different ways of thinking of equity. So anytime we talk about equity, we definitely need to define it and refine it so people understand that same term, that we're all on the same page with it, just for all learners. And I've done so much global work. So when you talk about digital equity, I'm thinking on a bigger scale than even US digital equity. So it's always important to refine that and define it. That you want to make a lasting impact on the educational system. And one thing that's important to know is PD or professional learning can be included in your ESSER expenditures. So you can plan for that as well. And then moving on, one of the courses I teach in our program at Lamar University on digital learning and leading, the whole thing focuses on the creation of e-portfolios and creating an innovation plan to affect change and make a difference. And they have to, during the process of the different courses, come up with their plan, create all these assets to go with their plan, figure out how they're going to distribute it, the timeline for their plan. And probably the most important is, how are they going to know it worked? And we use this text, not to sell the text, because there are lots of references for this or resources for this. This is the text we use for action research. So you can implement anything, but you have to step back and think about, does it work? Don Buckley, you're a big proponent of design thinking. And part of that process is testing it and seeing if you need to reiterate it. Same thing here. What worked? What didn't work? What could be done better and how? And how does this apply to my initiative or my innovation or whatever I'm creating moving forward? And these are really important. These are the questions we really focus on in a whole course of our graduate work as they're rolling out their innovation plans. They have to really think, how will I know if I've done better? How will I know if this program I started is really making a difference? So thinking about that and keeping that action research in mind, even if it's not for ESSER, if it's just there in general for you to think about as you're doing anything. We do that in our daily lives. We make a recipe in the kitchen for dinner, or we fix our car, or we work in the house and we do a room, whatever we're doing. What worked, what didn't work, what could be done better, and how can I apply this initiative moving forward? So the same way that we do this in our daily lives with everything that we're creating and repairing and everything, we need to do the same thing in education, and even more so. So as you're thinking of any funding you're having and how you're going to use it, think back on what you did in the pandemic. I do a lot of my workshops with teachers this way. What did you do last year in the virtual training? What worked well? I do it with superintendents. What worked well for your district? What didn't work well? How can you improve it? What could be done better? And how does it apply to what I want to do in the future? So just keep those four thoughts in mind as you're going through how you're going to implement. And the other part of the ESSER considerations to keep in mind is, how will you measure your success? Sometimes we have really clear data that comes through different types of data-driven decision-making tools that we have in our schools. Maybe, I always think of accelerated reader for our young children, but that's not real data in the big picture. But if you think about data that districts are collecting and data analytics on math and reading and literacy, you can measure that. But all these other things, how will you measure their success? Because data is important in your funding requirements. It's not just data at the end, it's ongoing data every part of the journey. So you need to keep analyzing that data, and there'll be certain times you have to give that data and report back to the federal government with ESSER funding, or to whatever your institution is that you're working with in other countries, that you need to show that you did use the funds appropriately. And even when things don't work like you planned, that's still data. And that still helps you grow. You're going to learn from that data. And then how do you keep things sustainable? So you have these great things. I mean, we see so many different kinds of devices being brought into the schools. Are they being implemented well? They have all this money to bring, for example, Chromebooks all over. Well, when that funding is gone, and in 5 years, the Chromebooks are outdated, or 4 years, or whatever time period it might be, how are you going to sustain that initiative? What are you planning to do at that point when you no longer have that funding? So you really have to think about how to make things sustainable once that funding is ended. And I love it, what you said, Lucy, about community participation, because that is such a big part of this. It's not just Julene thinking about how we should spend the money, or the superintendent, or the principal or the head of the school or the Ministry of Education, whatever your organization is. It's also involving the stakeholders, the teachers, the students, the families, the guardians, the community. So really bringing in the participation and support of those community and different groups is really important to have those stakeholders all involved throughout the process. So Curt is on here. Curt, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your story in Sun Prairie area schools? I think Curt is here. Is he still
I
here?
am here. I'm trying to get my mute button to.
That's okay. Go, Curt. Yay.
Thanks, Julene. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name is Curt Mould, and I am the Director of Digital Media Innovation and Strategy. That's my day job. I do a lot of other things. I too am a professor. I teach organizational entrepreneurship and innovation for the Rader School of Business MBA program at Milwaukee School of Engineering. And I work on a variety of projects with Fielding International, designing and working with schools around the world on designs for learning, whether that's physical space or what to do to create the best possible learning experiences in those spaces once those spaces are occupied. So super happy to be here and talk about ESSER funds. I really appreciate, Julene, your summary of how ESSER funds work, where they come from, how much money there is. That's the one question. I'm like, I wonder if somebody asks me how much money our district has in ESSER funds. I don't actually know that amount of money. I know that it's a lot, and I can tell you a little bit about what we have done with the money. And I'll break this down into, I would say, two buckets. One is sort of boilerplate and not innovative at all. And the other is something that I think will help us turn the tide on conversations on how to best retransition students back into learning spaces that, by and large, at least here in our community, have not been fully back in person in place for very long. And so I'll break my comments down into those two spaces around ESSER spending. So the first is fairly obvious. We needed to quickly transition and provide learning devices for kids. We're a one-to-one district. I do not say that with any sort of pride in its increase in achievement outcomes. A technology or a resource like an iPad or a Chromebook is simply a technology for learning, and that's how we use it. And the tool is there to foster creativity, to foster collaboration, to allow for anytime, anywhere, any place sort of learning. For us, however, in Sun Prairie, it's sort of the any pace that we were continue to find as a challenge for us, and breaking out of legacy models of curriculum and fidelity to scope and sequence. So we also had a need. We have a large community-based 4K program, so we don't offer 4K to our students in our schools. It is based primarily in spaces in the community, so daycare centers, childcare centers. The YMCA, for instance, hosts a 4K. And one of the things that we were committed to was providing continuity of learning regardless of the location of the learning. And so we wanted to make sure that our early childhood and 4K students had access to this continuity of learning vision. And so we had to quickly purchase 600 iPads and get those out. Now, that is not innovative. That's just getting the tools and the resources out. What I think was innovative was the fact that we had 4K students engaging in activities in their community spaces, and we were able to leverage our community partners to get students into our communities, out of their homes. And our littlest learners were out and about. And Lucy, I just saw your chat come through about 4K. So in Wisconsin, at least, school is not compulsory until you're in first grade, and kindergarten is optional. And we have a community that supports kindergarten, and we almost 100% of our students attend our kindergarten programming. 4K is right before kindergarten, so if 5K is kindergarten, then 4K is almost pre-kindergarten. And about 85% of the students in Sun Prairie attend a 4K program. And so the things that we want our students to come into kindergarten knowing and being able to do are really around play, around play for learning. A lot of times that includes, basic math cardinality, numbers, letter recognition, etc. It's not very academic. It's almost entirely play-based. Because they take place in schools, there's obviously a bleed over of academics into that, but that's not the intention of it. It's to get kids out of their home and into community settings with their peers. And anyways, we've had success with that. Purchasing devices for our families was something that I think is at the intersection of the Venn diagram between providing a tool and a resource and being innovative. One of the things that we wanted to do immediately was ensure that we had erased the digital divide, so that's in devices, but also the wireless divide in our community. We quickly partnered with a cell phone company here in Wisconsin. You may be familiar with it through commercials if you're familiar with the Midwest, which is US Cellular, and the partner Kajit is the vendor. And that allowed us to provide wireless services to families who were in need. We purchased unlimited data on all of those plans for a couple of reasons. One, we understood that kids needed to access wireless in order to have continuity of learning, but we also understood that while the pandemic was taking place, wireless connectivity was a lifeboat for many, many of our families. And so, the way that we painted within shades of gray about, how we went about hotspots was not just that they were for student learning, but they were also provided in an unlimited data fashion so that families could also use those devices as a lifeline to connect with families, to connect with employers, etc. We leveraged our community schools partnerships to help our families then also find the resources they needed to locate, COVID testing sites, to locate food pickup locations, etc. So those hotspots allowed our families, especially our families that live in poverty, an opportunity to connect with the tools and the resources that they needed without having to rely completely on expensive cell phone data plan. And so, as we started to attempt to collect those hotspots and, return them or recycle them through our system, we have found that only 40% of our families actually wanted to return that hotspot. So we have discovered that the need for a hotspot in our system is pretty significant, much greater than we initially anticipated. And so that's in the device side of things. That's how we've gone about it. So I feel like I'm just talking and rambling. I wonder if people have any questions right now before I transition into some of the other things that we're doing around learning and learning supports with ESSER funds.
Yeah, Curt, I have a question because I was somewhere this week, I saw something about, is it really equitable if only low socioeconomic students are receiving the support with devices and hotspots, or should all students support that? Have you had any kickback in that area?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question for the context in which I serve. We do have families who are not families living in poverty, but live geographically in a place where high-speed internet has not reached their neighborhood. It's in a previously rural agriculture. It's basically a giant farm field that's been turned into, you know, $250,000, $500,000 homes with 3-acre lots, right? So, but because they live in former farm fields, high-speed wireless infrastructure hasn't reached all of those locations. So for us, we provided hotspots to anybody who said they needed a hotspot, period. There's no questions asked. Tell us if you need it. We anticipated that we were going to end up closing about 6 weeks before we ended up closing. It was very obvious it was going to happen. We were watching what was happening on the East Coast. We watched what was happening on the West Coast. And we were able to get our orders in for hotspots before the bottom fell out. So we actually received the majority of our equipment before many of the other systems around us. And, you know, I'd ask we have a person here on our team here that's responsible for asset management. So, you know, through serendipity and a little bit of crystal ball work, she jumped on, she jumped on that quickly, and we were ahead of the game. So I hope that answers that question.
I have a question, and that is, you said that 40% of the families did not want to return the hotspots. Did you take them anyway?
No, they're still out there. They're still in use. Some of them are just very expensive paperweights. So we can actually see through our asset management system that they're not being used at all. So in the instances where the families have not demonstrated any use for a long period of time, we've reached out to them and asked them to return it so they could be issued to another family.
Mm-hmm.
If they told us they still needed it, then we basically checked it in and checked it back out to them like a library book. And so they still have that device and are still able to use it.
That's terrific. Great support.
No, I think we're good. Just go on ahead, Mark. Great job. Anybody else? I thought I saw somebody's hand go up though, actually, before we go on.
I had mine up, but then I decided to just turn on my microphone and talk.
Yeah, we're small enough. It's fine. All right.
Thanks, Julene. All right. So as I transition to some of the learning supports, so ESSER can be used for staffing. Okay. So one of the temptations in schools is that you solve problems with more people. And that's great. However, it also creates a funding cliff. And we wanted to make sure that we were in a situation where the models of support that we had in place could be sustained after the money went away. And so we didn't go out and hire a bunch of people. We did some restructuring of internal district roles. We did out of a coordinator who had previously resigned from her role in the district, take on a part-time special assignment role. But really what we wanted to do is make sure that the people who are in our buildings had the best possible training on meeting the needs of the students who are in front of them. And I'm going to unpack everything I just said. All right. So one of the issues that we're facing as a system is even if we wanted to hire more people, there are not more people to hire. I don't know if that's a common theme within.
It is a common theme. When you look at the state results, they're all looking for more teachers.
Right. So,
Oh, yeah.
the staff that serve the students with the greatest amount of needs, so our special education assistants, our instructional assistants, and in some cases, our intervention staff members, they are in a place of hiring right now where, we still have, to this day, we still have multiple unfilled positions. And so one of the elements that we wanted to really focus on is, we've done a lot of the work around teacher development and teacher training for universal instruction, and that's been focused on core classroom teachers. And one of the elements of recognition that we've come across is that the teachers who are quite literally on their hands and knees working directly with students, face-to-face, person-to-person, in a lot of these learning spaces have not accessed the universal curriculum training. And a lot of them have not ever received training or gone through any sort of professional learning or teaching in formalized learning environments like college and university around child development. And so we have now focused a large part of sort of the human resources elements of ESSER funds towards building up those skills and knowledge within the rank of, within the ranks of our educational assistants. This is, again, localized to our context. In Wisconsin, you have teachers of record. They're the licensed teacher. Their credentials are held through the Department of Public Instruction. Other staff members like special education assistants and some of our educational assistants do not have to have a college degree. They don't have to have a credential other than an associate's degree. And so a lot of the folks that we hire have never had any of that sort of formal training. And so what we're trying to do is pour into that particular employee group, recognizing that this is like a one-time, gift from the heavens to make sure that we can, provide these types of learning experiences for the staff members that work so closely with kids on a day-to-day basis. So, we've tried to avoid funding cliff situations. We also started to restructure our compensation plan so that for the special educational assistants and for the teaching assistants that serve in our schools and work directly with our kids, that they also are being compensated for the professional learning that they're engaging in. We've toyed around with ideas of micro credentials and badging, and that became a little bit hairy for us to be able to pull off. So, right now it's just tied to specific experiences that we want our teachers to experience. And one of the other areas that we've spent money in staffing is around social emotional learning. And, that gets a lot of buzz, and people really, I don't think have really fully unpacked that. My personal opinion is that, social emotional learning is best done in classroom learning experiences that are focused on the wellness of the whole child. And so, you don't teach self-awareness through a 15-minute lesson about what it means to be self-aware. You teach self-awareness by giving kids an opportunity to experience themselves working with others and in a space and reflecting authentically on it. And so, so when I say social emotional learning, what I actually mean is not a canned curriculum, which we have some of that to meet state requirements. So I don't want to sugarcoat that and say Sun Prairie's, rounded the corner where many others haven't. But a big part of our focus has been on restorative practices and teaching all kids restorative practices, understanding their role in the broader community through restorative circles. So we've poured into our staff professional learning that we feel is both necessary in the long term, but also necessary with the recognition that, at least in Sun Prairie, most of our students have not been together in person in a formal learning community in about 18 months. And so you can't just throw all of these kids and all these teachers, many of whom have never seen each other before as they've transitioned to new schools, into spaces in which they have they've not had that experience. And so trying to ease into, okay, what does an actual restart look like? If you were to start a school year anew, recognizing that most of the kids have had agency over when they wanted to go to the bathroom, when they wanted to use their phone, when they wanted to eat and drink, when they wanted to do their homework. And now we're throwing all of those kids back into a situation where, for all intents and purposes, they are, they're doing it under somebody else's direction again all of a sudden. And so, how do you actually restore people to a community like that, reestablish expectations, help kids relearn expectations, but do so in a way that's respectful, do so in a way that is accounting for the whole child. It's not just, here's the behavior handbook, get on with it. But like, hey, we haven't done this for a while. let's talk about what it should look like. So I feel that those are spaces where innovation is happening. And when I say innovation, I mean, because that's not something a lot of places are doing and not a lot of places are thinking about. And so, we're spending a lot of money, we're spending a lot of time, but I also think that it's focused on the right thing. And I also think it's wise in the way that we spent resources, because they are things that we're spending money on that can be sustained and will pay dividends in the long run, and not a smartboard that hangs on a wall that'll have to be replaced in 12 years. So, all right.
So when you say you're
That's what I
spending
got.
money on things that are important, you're talking about professional development for the teachers?
Yes.
And I've been listening to the rest of it. Can you identify a few more specifics?
So right now it's been around restorative practices, restorative justice, specifically around restorative circles. We've done professional learning for staff in those spaces, and we're talking professional development in those spaces, kindergarten through 12th grade. So for kindergartners, a lot of the PD looks similar to, what's the first 3 to 4 weeks of school look like. For our 9th graders who have not been in school since the end of their 7th grade and have transition schools or in a whole new environment with brand new people, it's more along the lines of how do we create conditions where we have thoughtful conversations with students around, we've never been at this before. We've never been at, our work in this space. What does this look like? What did you like about distance learning? How might we recreate that? So,
So have you defined any how things will be different, or is that a generative process?
Yeah, that's contextual to Sun Prairie. One of the things that has been happening throughout is we've actually we're close to finalizing occupancy of a brand new comprehensive high school that has a lot of these innovative features baked into it, but it's a grade level restructuring and brand new district boundaries. So we're going to start occupying spaces that are all under construction that will afford for different learning experiences. So it's not just PD around coming back, but it's an ongoing development of staff on how to occupy these innovative spaces moving forward. And what does day 1, day 30, day 90, day 180 look like next year? So not only do we have the pandemic, but we're also completely splitting up where kids go to school and how they go to school.
So this would have happened even if the pandemic hadn't come around.
I would say, the focus on transitioning kids back in probably would not have happened. The focus on learning for different types of learning experiences that build and produce student agency over time, I think would have remained a focus, yes.
How are you setting up your grades?
So right now we are going to be, currently we are a K-5 elementary school structure. We have 6-7 middle schools. We have 8-9 upper middle schools because our high schools were overcrowded. And then we have a 10-12 high school. Moving forward, we'll have 6-8 middle schools and 9-12 high schools.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions and great conversation, Curt. And the student agency is something I'm very strong about and passionate about. That's what our whole grad course focuses on, but that's really important with blended learning, personalized learning, differentiated instruction. Give them choice on how they learn, giving them voice and ownership of their learning, making it authentic, and how they demonstrate their understanding. Those are such big pieces. And sometimes I think that's left out of some of this planning for funding and how they're going to use those funding. So big kudos to you for making sure you're building that in. Does anyone else have any other questions for Curt? All righty. So Greg, did you have anything to add?
Hi, sure. Sorry, I'm in my car. I was balancing, so I'm not going to go cameras on. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Just fine.
Great. I want to appreciate the conversation, and I thank you for the opportunity just to share a few of my own perspectives. Just being going through this as a senior leader in a large urban school district, I think I want to complement part of the discussion, all of the discussion. One area I want to hone in on is when we talk about ESSER 3, I think it's important to also remember or lift up that we had ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. And at different stages of the last year and a half, ESSER 1 largely was to be able to respond quickly as students transitioned to various forms of distance learning. So you saw those quick expenditures on the devices, the connectivity, the PPE, staffing, sanitation, even throughout the pandemic, we saw funding needing to go to barriers. So there's this, the physical barriers, and this was early in the pandemic. And so the clinical advice was, oh, we need partitions. And then as we learned more about COVID, we realized that those partitions actually were not as helpful at all. And in fact, in some cases could be more harmful. So you saw the funding shift from those, plastic or the different barriers to actually going to the level of MERV, the filtration. So going to those higher levels of heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems. And that was a lot of ESSER 1. ESSER 2 was really a continuation of that. And now as we look at ESSER 3, just from a meta level, when we look at why and how those funds were passed, it is a multi-year approach because there's an understanding that, yes, and I agree with everybody here, the bureaucratic term of learning loss is all wrong. This is a good colleague of mine, has had research around learning leaps and how do we rebound, or acceleration, with the understanding that we do have to accelerate and there is an expectation we accelerate. And so Curt, to your point and your plan, the intent largely of the dollars, you're seeing it split out amongst getting kids back to school, but also we should be accelerating the plans that were already in place. And so one of the things, at least when the legislation was passed, the Council of Great City Schools and large school districts that were helping Congress understand is that there's a belief and a sentiment that what school districts will do is take the visions, the 10-year plan, the 5-year plan, the multi-year plans, because they already knew and know the students' needs. And to use these additional funds to accelerate these practices, now knowing that in a pandemic, any conditions that were existing, any needs that were existing, the social emotional supports, the trauma, I should reference the restorative practices, those things that need to be restored, there's a good chance all of those issues got worse in a pandemic. If students were experiencing issues, it got worse. So in fact, we need the additional infusion to expedite the plans that boards of education and leadership groups have already established. And so that's where in ESSER, you see some references to the need to have it be research-based. And they have 4 tiers of research for at least 20% of the funds, but up to 100% of the funds, there's an expectation that people will be implementing research-based practices that actually show that students are improving. And again, these are not necessarily products or services that were created in the pandemic. It's to help further initiatives that were perhaps already existing, and there needs to be additional work, whatever that may be. Now, certainly there's a whole new market, but also when we go into the intent, and I do come back to the equity piece, and I'm very much appreciating that there may be different understandings of equity. The general way that it's framed in terms of different organizations and with the intent here, at least my understanding is, it's addressing students where they are with what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. down to that student by student level. And so absolutely, my humble opinion, we talk about devices. Devices are not distributed to just areas of low income or anything like that. You give a device to the child and the family that say they need it, because there's no way of knowing what is actually happening in that home, potentially that trauma that they're experiencing, their loved ones in a pandemic, all those pieces. And so we can't make assumptions. So when we get down to equity, it in my opinion, it's really not equality, because what I need might be different than what somebody else needs. It's about equity is about what I need, the way I need it, and in the timeliness that I need it. That's equity to me, and that has been the general working definition as these ESSER funds were put together. So just a couple of observations as we think about, how do we take this momentum of work and these best practices and the pieces that are out there, and if we want to be able to dialogue and create supports and have inroads with school districts and education, charter schools, private schools, independent schools, part of it is also understanding and dialoguing where are they already going, because there's a good chance that the governing boards, the communities, the teachers, the labor unions, there's an expectation that they will be accelerating the plans that they already have. And should things look different? Absolutely, they should look different. We've never been in a pandemic, for the most part. So aspects should be new. So I thank you for the opportunity just to share a little bit of where and how the language was framed and what was shared with Congress as the different layers of ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and then also those layers of expectation as ESSER 1 is pretty much done and been expended. ESSER 2 is within the next year, and then ESSER 3, as absolutely you're right, it's through a couple of years down the road. And I want to just kind of end on what Curt was saying and what others were saying. Yeah, these are one-time dollars. So be very careful with the supports that are put into place. Is it a stopgap if you need these funds to buy additional devices, whatever it may be, and be mindful of now how, with a couple years of funding potentially, how do you make sure that you're scaling so that you don't hit that cliff, if you will, as the term was used earlier. So all of those things I just say to, sharing that version of equity that at least I believe in, and a lot of the Department of Education and others, that's where they've been rooted in this legislation as it was shared through the different layers. And then moving forward to really accelerating with plans that are already in place and then modifying as is needed for those trauma, social emotional supports, restorative practices, all those pieces. So I thank you for sharing that, or letting me share. It's kind of the meta level. And again, I'm happy to be in the dialogue and support.
No, we're excited you did. That was awesome. Couldn't you encourage? You two are like the experts here. I know enough to be dangerous sometimes. This is not my area of expertise, but obviously it is yours. So we really appreciate that. And just quickly, as we're coming to close, we can continue the conversation as much as we want after we just kind of close this part out. And Lucy and I already in the background discussing, maybe we need a part 2 of this where we can get deeper into it, because this really is an awesome conversation. But there is a document that helps us look at some of the goals of some of the states. And so when you look at the goals of some of the states, we're going to give you this link. It's in your resources, and you can pull it up and see how many plans have been submitted, how many have been approved for future ed state planning, plan tracking. And of course, like you said, there's different levels of this, but it was interesting to go through this and look at the different segments in each column of what each state was doing. So I just did a quick little overview of it. And these were the common themes that I found just when I quickly scanned all of these. Health, safety, and wellness, number 1, SEL, number 2. And that includes trauma-induced support. So that restorative practice really fits in here, including some bringing in staff psychiatrists and mental health specialists on staff. And whenever actionable innovations participants or one of our group that is in this group, one of the members of our group focuses on SEL. I've done a lot of work with SEL, but her doctor was on it. So she can even speak to this at a higher level than I can. And I felt like I'd done a lot. So that's so important for teachers, for students, and it's not over. People think the kids did fine. They didn't do fine. Teachers haven't done fine. That's how I actually start all of my professional learning events, is talking about SEL first. How you feeling? What's, we've been through a lot. And then going into what worked, what didn't work, how can we do better, those kinds of conversations. You'll see a lot about accelerating learning outcomes, and we have to think, what does that really mean? But you'll see learning loss, that term we don't like, SPED support, some for gifted talented. So that's good. And guiding students to get to advanced degrees in the high school levels. Digital equity, connectivity and devices for all, including at home, which we've seen. Cultural sensitivity and racial bias is becoming more and more at the forefront. So there is a lot with that. And I actually have, if we want to have a session on that, one of my colleagues with whom I work is finishing her doctorate on that at USC. And she could talk to you all day about it. And it is something we really need to be weaving into everything we're doing, is that cultural sensitivity and working on racial bias, including the workforce diversification. You'll see one of the states is really, and it was interesting, it's either Arkansas or Mississippi, and I'm in Tennessee, and I'm thinking they want to have more diversity in the teacher workforce, and Memphis has tons of diversity. So I found that interesting. Job embedded coaching, giving them time for the coaching, and expanded teacher learning opportunities. PD is part of it, but not the only way. There are multiple ways for teacher to learn. And there was a big focus on literacy, math, and science. Infrastructure was a big one, making sure we have the infrastructure in our schools and building new building designs to support the new types of innovations that you're guiding, just like Curt said earlier, is really important. And another thing that Curt said is teacher recruitment and retention. How do we retain them? Why would they want to quit after a year like this? I can't imagine. But how do we recruit them and how do we retain them? And then just as we come to the final close here, these were some of the innovative ideas I saw for some states. Utah, early learning coaches for their rural areas, which I thought was really interesting. And in Connecticut, statewide curriculum to ensure that all students, including gifted and talented, will have opportunities to engage, discover, and connect to challenging content, not just the standard curricula. Oregon, strengthening high quality, culturally sustaining and revitalizing instruction. Leadership is included here, which is important. And pathways to graduation and post-secondary transitions. Georgia, this was interesting. They're using a gig teaching model because they don't have enough teachers. So they're pulling in retired teachers and others who necessarily aren't certified or in other areas to provide virtual mentoring, tutoring, and other courses across the state. They're focused on compassion over compliance and reimagining education. And I think so many of us are at that base level. We're not reimagining education. We need to, like you said, we don't want to do it the same way. I think it was Curt who said that. We need to be forward thinking. We want to do things differently. We don't want to go backwards. But I love this one. One district's giving every teacher $1,000 one-time bonus. Go for it. They earned it.
Is that just a pat on the back saying thanks for being here?
I think so.
No, I'm serious.
I don't know. I just saw it on the list, but you know what? If they feel like it's important, it must be. I don't know. Yeah. And the last thing I just wanted to say, that's a great question. The last thing I want to say is, what is considered innovative? It's, Curt, you started where yours was saying this isn't innovative. No, it was innovative. It was innovative to what you needed. And that's what we have to think of. This is from a Harvard leadership conference, and it's just a visual of what they did during the leadership conference. But I want you to think about not just innovation, but what's the culture within your build that you're working in? What is the culture of your district, your school? And what is your context? And so Curt and Greg, you both were talking about what was important to the context of where you are in your school, in your district, in your community. And I also what's important to that culture. And so just because I looked at that spreadsheet the first time and thought, well, this doesn't seem real innovative because I'm up here on 50,000 feet. We need to remember these are very innovative for a lot of these communities. So we have to take that with a grain of salt. So it's, what's innovative is unique and personalized for that area. So we're going to skip this little activity. We have the same spreadsheet for you. So we're going to skip this because of time, but we do have the resources here, and I'll let Lucy close us out.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks Curt and Greg and Julene for an amazing session. This was really informative and inspiring, and I think that we need a part 2. So in 2 weeks, next week we're going to have a conversation. We're shifting our sessions to Fridays at 1 p.m. and Bill Rankin, who is here, is going to be talking about assessment on September 24th. That following Friday, I think we're going to reserve for a follow-up to school funding, and dive into the activity that we had planned today, which was to look at the spreadsheet that's listed on our resources, and kind of pick out what stood out to us and have a discussion about that. I think there's a lot more. Yeah, go ahead.
And I guess is that I wish we had more time for more conversation. So hopefully that time we'll have a lot more time for your input and your feedback and your conversation.
Yeah. And to talk more to your point, Julian, about innovation and what is innovative and what, it doesn't necessarily mean to be something, pie in the sky kind of ideas. It depends on your context. So I think diving into that idea and into the spreadsheet a little bit more would help people kind of further their thinking, and we can do that in 2 weeks. So don't forget to follow us. I will have the recording up. I didn't do the live transcript this time. I forgot to start that, but I will be posting the link to the recording probably in the next day or so up on YouTube, and we'll shoot it out over other social media. And you can also sign up if you're interested in joining our group and being part of the heavy lifting of forming this consultancy. Send me an email and I'll send you some information and we can have a conversation about that. And then finally,
what time zone are you using, Lucy?
Central Time, Lee.
Thank you.
So the it's on the most of the information. And then our next conversation is going to be with Bill Rankin on September 24th. On October 15th, one of the members, Kelly Gray, who is the Associate Director of the Design Lab at Barnard College, is going to be talking about a STEAM program that she developed in partnership with the New York City Park District, teaching teachers on how to use the Park District resources in their teaching. So you can register for that at on Eventbrite for all those sessions, and we'll have more coming up to get them scheduled. So thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. If you want to stick around and chat, you're more than welcome to, but I'm going to stop recording